friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to bring you another Copic coloring video. I'm going to be coloring one specific animal in multiple different ways. I've done a few of these videos in the past, and usually I keep them in the back with my hex chart in my little page protector with my Copic coloring chart. But they got a little bit too heavy for there, so I needed to find another solution. So I actually picked up a photo album at the thrift store. It was $3.99 at Goodwill, and it fits all of my coloring sheets perfectly. So I have been keeping these in here now, and I have plenty of room in the back to grow. So really great option and very inexpensive as well. And I can just keep that to the side of my desk right next to my Copic coloring chart. So I'm sure that the critter I am doing today is no secret since it was already in the title and thumbnail of this video. I'm going to be coloring squirrels using the Hello Bluebird Oh Nuts stamp set. So I've stamped out my little squirrel on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to start with a brown squirrel. So I'm going to use E50, E51, E53, E55, and E57. I like to color darkest to lightest, so I'm going to begin with my shadows using that E57. I'm laying those in on the left side of the body. Since my critter is facing toward the right, I like to keep the face nice and highlighted so that you can make out all of their adorable features. So once I have that E57 laid in, I'm going to start to blend that out with the E55. Just making sure to go over the edge of the previous shade and pull that into the mid-tone so that it doesn't leave behind any harsh lines. I'm going to put a little extra shadow on the tail since it is back behind the body, so it would be not getting as much light as the front of the body. And then I'm going to come in with my mid-tone, which is going to be E53. And I will use this to fill in most of the rest of my squirrel's fur. I'm going to do the belly a little bit lighter, and I'll save a little bit of room on the lower part of the face to help me transition down into the belly since there's not a line separating that out. So once I have everything filled in with the E53, I'll come in with the E51, fill in the rest of the face, add a little bit of shading to the belly, and then blend on the E50 for the rest of the belly. Now there were a couple little places where I felt like the blend wasn't as smooth as I wanted, so I did go back and do a second layer with a few of those shades. I started with the E55 and the E53. I was happy with the darkest shadows. I just wanted to blend the mid-tone and the highlight. And then I'll grab a black smudge-proof pen and just jot down those color combos so that you can have them for a reference if you'd like to take a screenshot or whatever, or color them for yourselves and keep a chart handy for your own reference point. Then I'm going to move on to my next squirrel, and this is again going to be a brown squirrel, but it's a little bit more of a reddish tinge in this particular brown combo. So I'm using E30, E31, E33, E35, and E37. And again, it's just the darkest three shades that I'm using on the majority of the body. So the E37 is what I am starting with, laying in those shadows, also putting a bit of a shadow on the inner curve of the tail since that is bent away from the light, and then blending out with that E35, but saving a little bit of room there for my highlight so that we have some nice dimension on this little guy. Pulling that color up around the bottom edge of that curved tail. And then I'll come in with the E33 and start to blend toward the center of the face. Fill in the rest of the arms and legs. And then I'll also fill in the rest of the tail by bringing the mid-tone to kind of join together with the highlight. So kind of just coloring over the edge of that and pulling it into there. And then I'm going to use the E31 for the inner ears, the lower part of the face, and the shading on the belly, and then I'll use the E30 to finish him off. I'll also throw a little bit of that E30 on the inner ears, and then I am going to do a second layer on this guy as well. I don't always do a second layer, but I do it pretty often. It just really smooths out your blends and makes your coloring more saturated without adding in a darker marker. It's just going to make everything a bit more vibrant because there is that second layer. So I'm just going over exactly what I've already done and making those colors a little bit richer. And I did use all three of the darkest shades for that second layer because I felt like the shadows could be a little deeper. And then I am going to jot down the colors that I used for this little guy. And we will move on to squirrel number 3, which is going to be my personal favorite animal, which is the red squirrel. I just love red squirrels so much. They're a little bit different from their gray squirrel counterparts or any other squirrels. I just think they're super sweet. They're usually smaller in size and they often have pointy tufted ears. So this isn't exactly what a red squirrel looks like, but I'm still going to use the same combo that I would on a red squirrel, which is going to be E11, E13, E15, E17, and E18. So I'm starting with the E18 and laying in my shadows with that, blending out with the E17. I'm basically doing my shading exactly the same on all of these guys, not only because I do like to keep the face light and the shadows on the back, but also because I want you to be able to easily compare the different color combos. And I find that it's easier to do a comparison when all of the shading is done exactly the same. So I am blending out the E17 with the E15. For this little guy, I did save a little bit of room on the ends of his hands because the E15 is still quite dark. So I decided to fill those in with the E13. I also filled in the inner ears and the center of the face. Then I'll bring that down the belly for my shading. I also noticed a little sliver that I missed on the tail, so I just filled that in with the E13. And then blended out the belly with the E11, but I wanted to go just a little bit lighter than that. The E11 is still a bit dark, so I brought in E00 to finish that off. So I really like how that works. The E00 is a nice transition from the E11 because it does have kind of that warm, rosy undertone to it. So I'll just write down the shades that I used for this guy. For squirrel number 4, I am going to go with a combo that is my favorite for mice, but I thought I would try it on the squirrel and see how that looks, and that is W00, W1 with E70, E71, and E74. So it's just going to be the E70s for the main part of the body, starting with that E74, and then I will begin to blend that out with the E71. Often when I use this combo for mice, I skip the E74, but they're usually a little bit smaller. And since this squirrel is a bit of a larger image, I felt like I needed to have one extra dark color to give it the same amount of impact. So once I have the E71 blended out, I will come in with the E70. And just bring that in. I like to sometimes use little circular motions if I feel like the previous shade might leave behind a harsh line. That kind of just helps to break up the edge of it. And then I will bring in the W1 for the lower part of the face. Just kind of smooth over the edge of that E70. Bring that down the belly for my shading. And then fill in with the W00, and I did leave a little sliver of a white highlight on that one. And then I am going to come in with a second layer on this guy as well, just to increase the depth in the shadowed areas especially, but I want to keep blending that out. I don't want to just leave that dark color on its own. So let me know if you guys would be interested in me doing a video comparing one layer of coloring to 2 or maybe even 3 layers of coloring, just so you can see those side by side. If that sounds like something interesting, leave me a comment and let me know. So I'll bring in that W1 again on the belly just to increase that depth and blend out with the W00, again leaving a little bit of white space for an extra highlight. And then I'll write down the colors I used below this little guy, and we'll move on to squirrel number 5. For squirrel number 5, we're going to do a gray squirrel. So I'm going to keep the W00 and W1. I think warm grays look really nice for gray squirrels. I tend to prefer warm grays for critters and cool grays for inanimate objects. But sometimes if I'm doing a black animal, I do like a little bit of a cooler tone. So it just depends on whether I'm going for a lighter gray critter or a almost black critter. So I'm using W00, W1, W3, and W5. Starting with the W5, you could even go up to the W7 if you wanted to, but I wanted to keep him a little bit more on the lighter side. Blended out the W5 with the W3, and then I'm coming in with the W1 for the highlight. And I could already see that I wasn't happy with the blend on the tail. I wanted it to look a little bit deeper and more shadowed since it is behind his body. So I went straight in with a second layer on only that part. And then I will blend out the lower part of the face with the W00 and bring that down on the belly. But of course that wasn't enough on its own, so I did bring in some W1 on the belly and blend that back out with the W00, and also left another sliver of white space for an extra highlight. So I'll write down the colors I used for this little guy, and we'll move on to our last squirrel. And for this guy, I wanted to do a black squirrel because there are black squirrels. We have them occasionally here, although they are rare to see, but I've seen them a whole bunch up in Canada when we visited up there. So I definitely wanted to include a black squirrel. I think they're really cool looking. So I did go with the ends, which are a little bit on the cooler side. It's not quite as cool as a cool gray, but it is cooler than the warm gray or the toner grays. So I'm using N0, N1, N3, N5, and N7. If you wanted to go even darker, you could bring in the N9, but I wanted to keep his features still nice and light, and I think the N7 does a good job at conveying that he looks like a black critter. So I am blending out the N7 with the N5 and then using the N3 for the main parts of his body. I'll fill in the top of his tail where the light would be reflecting the most with that N3, and then I'll bring in N1 to fill in his inner ears and the lower part of his face. Bring that down on the belly and blend out with the N0. And I did add a little more of that N1 on the belly because it got a little bit lost there. And then I went back over the transition from just the mid-tone to the highlight with that N3 on a couple little areas of his body. And then I will jot down my numbers for this guy. And then we'll add some rosy cheeks and fill in their noses and all of that, because that's what really brings your critters to life, is adding those little details. So if my critters or my kiddos are on the lighter side, I typically use R20 and R11 for the rosy cheeks. But since most of these critters are on the darker side, I went one step up using R20 and R22. So I laid in the R22 first on the cheek area, and then I'm just blending around the edges of that with the R20, which is going to soften it into the rest of the fur. I'll also throw just a touch of that R20 into the inner ears so that can blend with the color of the fur that I've already added. And then you have a couple of different options with the noses. I will often go for a pink nose because I just like the way it ties in the inner ear and the cheeks. It's just like a little triangle of pink touches, but you could also go with a dark brown like the E47. You could use a dark gray or even black. It's really up to you. But that is going to finish off this little video with these adorable squirrels. Of course, there's even more options, but this is just to give you a few different ideas of some different combos that you might like to try with your future cards. Sometimes it's nice to change it up and do something a little bit different depending on the color palette that you're working with, so that it matches a little bit better with your pattern paper or your distress oxides or your watercolors or whatever it is that you're using. You know, if you're using warmer tones, you might want to go with like the gray or the brown. If you're using cooler tones, you might want to go with the black or the grayish. It really is up to you, and there are endless opportunities and possibilities. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you'd like to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will be listed and linked below in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Definitely leave me a comment below and let me know which critter I should color next, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!